Trump has officially been in office for 100 days. When asked how it's going, his administration had this to say.
We are tired, and we're proud of our accomplishments. It feels like we live in a different world.
Girl, not as tired as we are. Like they say time flies when you're having fun, but I say time flies when you're under a constant barrage of negative news stories and fighting the feeling of impending doom. I will give Trump this though, he has without a question done more in his first 100 days than any president before him. In fact, he's done so much, we could be here for hours unpacking it all. But instead, I'm going to go over the 3 biggest L's this administration has taken thus far. And just to prove that I'm not a TDS partisan hack, we're also going to cover one good thing that he's been doing that I actually think has flown under the radar and not gotten enough attention. So let's dive in. First, I'm Hannah Cox. Welcome to my channel where I bring you politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we get started, make sure you like this video, take a second and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss any of my videos. Now, as my regular listeners know, I have spent most of April on the road. I've been lobbying, I've been speaking, I've been doing a lot of mainstream media appearances, so I have not gotten to make as much online content as usual, and there has been so much happening over the past 4 weeks that I have wanted to cover, that you all have messaged me and asked me to cover, and I simply have not had the capacity to do so. Even in trying to determine which topics to talk about today, I was torn. You know, we could talk about how Trump ran his mouth randomly about Canada and ended up getting a progressive elected over the past week. We could talk about how Doge has turned into political theater and Elon is jumping ship while the Republicans, who have the majority in Congress, have failed to implement any single one of the suggested cuts so far, which they mostly have to do in order for Doge to actually have any meat to it whatsoever. Even Trump in a recent interview had to drastically scale back the claims the administration has been trying to make about how much they've actually cut in spending. In fact, they've been spending just as he did in his first administration, like drunken teenagers.
Overall, we've saved hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, the original promise was $2 trillion, went to $1 trillion, now to $150 billion and heading south.
You don't know what it's going to be because we have things that are at a very high level that are being looked at right now.
We also could discuss J.D. Vance killing the Pope. I kid, but I did spend a full 24 hours laughing at those memes. That was absolutely hilarious. But once I sat down and really considered most of what has happened over the past 100 days, I decided to focus my attention on the top issues that you guys have asked me to weigh in that also tend to be correlating with the top agenda items most people are talking about right now. So here are our 3 L's of the first 100 days in the Trump administration. Obviously, we have to talk about the tariffs. Now, I've had a lot of you asking me to weigh in on the tariffs. I just want to point out I've made at least 2 videos I will relink here examining the actual economics of tariffs, looking at the predictions around them, weighing in on them as a policy front, both before they were actually put in place and shortly after they first started to be implemented. So if you're looking for more of that analysis, please go back and watch those videos or listen to those episodes. I want to talk about where we are today. And where we are today is that Trump and his team want you to know that his tariffs are amazing and beautiful. They're enriching the American economy, actually, because other countries pay them. But also, if you disclose them on your website, you are committing treason.
It was reported this morning that Amazon will soon display a little number next to the price of each product that shows how much the Trump tariffs are adding to the cost of each product. So isn't that a perfect, crystal clear demonstration that it's the American consumer and not China who is going to have to pay for these policies?
I will take this since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? And I would also add that it's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm. So this is another reason why Americans should buy American. It's another reason why we are onshoring critical supply chains here at home to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing here.
I can't with these people. I loved this person on Twitter said, I would like a Trump voter to explain to me why they wouldn't want tariff surcharges clearly displayed when they buy a product from Amazon. And I would like that explained too, because honestly, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If you actually believe tariffs are good, if you actually believe other countries pay them, if you actually believe they are enriching our economy, and if you actually believe that the point of the tariff is to get people to buy American-made products, then why would you have an issue with a company listing which products are being impacted by those tariffs so that other consumers can avoid them and buy American and be proud of their patriotic duty. It's almost like none of you believe your own BS. Caroline Leavitt is also quickly rising in the rankings of like most annoying press secretaries of all time. Like I thought the Biden press secretaries were really embarrassing and constantly gaslighting people. Caroline is every bit as bad as they are, but she does it with like this big chunky cross around her neck, which I'm just waiting for her to get like struck by lightning at some point. It's in the 10 Commandments that you're not supposed to lie, okay? This is basic Christian stuff. It's just so amusing to watch this hypocrisy going down, because if the Biden administration were hassling a private business like this and threatening them and having phone calls telling them that they better not list their prices, or there's going to be retribution, or coming out and trying to frame that company as like having some kind of alliance with our foreign enemies, then the Republicans would correctly identify that as like a commie thing to do and would completely trash it. But because Trump's doing it, it's okay. It's a cult. It's a cult. It's a cult. It's a cult. Like nothing makes any sense in MAGA world whatsoever. There's not even a single strand of logic running through it. They just take the slop they're fed and run with it. And they're parroting her saying, yeah, why didn't Amazon list the inflation prices? Well, number one, probably because inflation was created slowly over time, not in one fell swoop. So it was a little bit harder to quantify. Secondarily, you know, Trump was largely responsible for the inflation we've been living with too, right? No, I'm sure you don't know that. I'm sure you've completely memory hold it, but this is very easy to go Google and fact check. The truth is the Trump camp is losing this trade war, and they're losing it badly. Trump is having imaginary phone calls with President Xi every other week. They're backing off one component or another. I loved this person on Twitter said, the tariffs are such a good idea that we need to keep exempting politically connected groups and attacking proposals to show the impact of the tariffs on consumer prices. That's how you know they're good. The Trump camp is forever going to push this notion that Trump is just so much smarter than the rest of us, and he's operating on this plane that you just absolutely could not understand because you're not as brilliant as he is. He's playing 4D chess, okay? I will be the first to admit I've never played 4D chess, but if this is what watching a game of it feels like being trapped inside the head of a paranoid schizophrenic that can't remember if they're on the white pieces team or the black pieces team. Even within the administration, no one knows what's going on. The Treasury Secretary is coming out and saying one thing that's contradicting Trump. Everybody's confused. Most importantly, our own stock market and investors are confused. There's no stability. Everybody's retirement is up and down and up and down. And I'm just not here for the Trump administration trying to gaslight the American people into thinking that this is a good thing. It gives major Biden vibes. They keep coming out and be like, it's just a little temporary pain. Just have some patience. You're going to see the benefit from tariffs any minute now. And that talking point just gives the exact same vibes as the whole like just 2 weeks to stop the spread thing, which also traces back to Trump. So interesting. Like this is no different than the Biden administration trying to tell us that inflation is transitory. They just think you're stupid. And it turns out a lot of people are. The reality on the ground is that in Q1 alone of 2025, the U.S. economy contracted by 0.3%, marking the first decline in nearly 3 years. The average U.S. household is projected to incur an additional $800 annually due to higher prices on imported goods, including electronics, clothing, and groceries, some pretty essential stuff. Economists are actually forecasting that the U.S. inflation will average 2.7% over the next year, up from previous estimates of 2.5%, and that will be driven almost exclusively by the increased cost of tariffs. And then you have Goldman Sachs, which has lowered its U.S. growth forecast for 2025 from 1.5% to 1.3%, citing tariff-induced recession risk. And all for what? The moronic end goal of bringing factories back to the U.S., which is not going to happen, first and foremost. I've said this before, but if you think that tariffs are going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., you fundamentally do not understand why manufacturing left in the first place. I really loved this tweet from Alice Vaughn, where she pointed out what would actually take to get manufacturing to move back to the U.S. and just how deranged this whole goal actually even is. She said, people keep saying tariffs will bring back American manufacturing. Here's what that would actually require. 1, 5 to 10 years of sustained high tariffs across imports, not just from China, but from every country companies might pivot to, like Vietnam or Mexico or India, because anything less in the production will just shift, not reshape. Number 2, she said it requires a deliberately weaker US dollar to make American labor look cheaper globally. That also means inflation, higher consumer prices, and weaker purchasing power for years. 3rd, it would take massive government investment, not just tax credits, but actual funding for domestic infrastructure, port expansion, energy grids, raw material processing, and critical manufacturing capacity. You can't reshore anything without a foundation. Fourth, workforce development at scale. We need a nationwide push to train welders, machinists, toolmakers, skills we stopped teaching at scale 30 years ago. Next, you'd have to have corporate commitment despite higher costs. U.S. labor and regulation aren't cheap, which is why manufacturing left. You guys made it too expensive to build and hire here in the first place, and none of this changes that. But she's correct in pointing out that you'd need major brands to stay here even when it hurts their profits. That only happens if they believe the tariffs are permanent, and they won't be because Trump is doing this unilaterally versus going through Congress like he should have to in order to do this. Not only is the goal of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. not really feasible, at least not through this agenda, it's also just dumb on its face. I love how this person put it on Twitter. He said, tariffs may cause short-term economic contraction, but in the long run, they'll unlock the American dream of working in a factory and making less than a cashier at Walmart. Now, Trump mostly got elected because people wanted relief from the progressive economics of the past 4 years. They're not getting it, and it is starting to impact him in the polls already. Multiple polls, including those by NPR, PBS, Marist, and The Economist YouGov, place President Trump's overall approval rating between 39% and 42%, with a disapproval rating nearing 60%. Another YouGov poll for The Times revealed that only 23% of Americans rate the economy as excellent or good, while 51% believe it is worsening. So on the economy, he gets a big fat X. The next policy I want to talk about that is a huge L is particularly funny because it is premised around the notion of paying women to have babies. I think it's one of the creepier policies that the administration has floated. They basically said over the past couple of weeks that they're toying with the idea of paying women $5,000 per baby. And there are a lot of problems with this proposal, but the thing that makes it funny is just how obtuse it is, because what people actually need in order to want to have kids is economic stability. And so you can't be over here like rattling the economy and screwing up our country while expecting people to pop out babies. Like $5,000 is not going to cut it. This proposal seems like something that came out of like the terminally online, red pill adjacent Musk, JD Vance side of the administration because they're obsessed with the birth rate decline for reasons that I actually laid out in another video not long ago. If you want to go back and watch that, I think you should. Personally, I believe this conversation has a lot more to do with creating more tax slaves for the government that they want to just keep expanding. And I think there's also a sentiment of like getting women back in their place. I think that has more to do with this whole agenda item than any actual concerns they're going to bring up around the birth rate decline. But for the sake of this segment, I'm going to be charitable and pretend that this is something they care about on its face for ethical reasons. So let me just take my critical thinking hat off for a second and get into character. Okay, even if you examine this proposal on its face and you assume that the birth rate decline is a huge issue and it's an existential threat and we have to stop it, this proposal is still stupid as $5,000 for a baby? I don't know anyone who doesn't want to have kids and would change their mind for $5,000. As if that would even cover the copay for most deliveries. And if that person is out there, if that person exists, I'm pretty sure it is the exact kind of person that we do not want procreating. I loved this tweet from Evan DeSimon. He said, incredibly funny to anyone who's been alive long enough to remember when Republicans used to accuse women of having extra babies to extend their welfare benefits. The MAGA wing of the GOP is a left-wing operation, both on an economic front, but also oftentimes on a social front. Not only is this policy creepy and invasive and seems to have some seedy motivations underlying it, it's also already been tried in numerous other countries and failed. As this article pointed out in Vox and many others mimicked it, there are multiple countries that have tried everything from cash to patriotic calls to duty to reverse drastically declining birth rates, and it doesn't work. What makes this entire conversation all the more low IQ, not only is it being driven by men, but it seems to be driven by men who have never once sat down and talked to a woman about why they might not want to have kids. If you want to change people's minds, you have to actually address the real reasons that they have the stance they have in the first place. And when you talk to most women, the reason they don't want kids has very little to do with money. In fact, poor women have a lot more kids than wealthier, more educated women do. But I know listening to women on any topic is increasingly novel for many in leadership within the GOP right now. If you're curious what those reasons actually are, I made another video detailing them, I think sometime last year, so I'll also link that. But you need to actually address the long-term issues in society for why people aren't procreating. You also have to accept that a number of people simply don't want kids, and that's okay because you don't want people who don't want kids to have kids. Unwanted kids create the vast majority of issues in society. And I know some grifters got mad when I said this on Twitter last week, but that's because I understand economics and social policy and they don't. They're just grifters. There's easy data to look up around this, from homelessness to addiction to abuse to who is in our jails and prisons. It all traces back largely to kids who are abandoned or unwanted or neglected. We have more people on Earth than we've ever had before. It's okay if we don't maintain those numbers. That doesn't mean we're going to go extinct. That doesn't mean that we are in dire straits. It doesn't even mean that this trend is permanent. It simply means right now that there are a percentage of people who don't want kids, don't think they would be good parents, and shouldn't have kids. And they now actually have both the social freedom and the access to medical resources to control that. It also means there is a sizable portion of the population that doesn't feel like we're on a good trajectory, doesn't feel like the world's in a good place, doesn't feel like this is something they want to bring a child into. And I think that's pretty valid. Trump and his administration might have a good bit to do with that. So if you want people to change their minds, you need to work on the long-term problems. You need to actually create a good and stable economy that has jobs, that has options for people. You need to do things like fix the healthcare system so that people can afford to take care of their children. You need to do things like implement school choice so that people can give their kids a good education and have a good trajectory in their own careers they can feel excited and optimistic about. There's a lot that needs to happen to convince more people to have kids, but so far the Trump administration is not focused on hardly any of it. Instead, they're largely doing the opposite. They're creating instability, particularly economically, and they're starting to do really crazy things that undermine the basic rule of law and civil norms we've had, like deporting people to foreign prisons without due process. Like, even if I wanted kids, and I don't, but let's say I did, and I looked around right now and saw what was happening politically in this country, I think I might hit pause on that. So yeah, let's move into the third L, which is Trump's deportation agenda. Now, Trump was elected to clean up the immigration system and handle all the illegal immigrants here, probably above almost anything else besides the economy. Personally, I'm pro-immigration. This is an issue that has caused me to break away from Republicans. I think it's economically illiterate. I also think many of their stances are anti-human rights, but there's some validity to this. It is against our laws to come here illegally. It does hurt people. Particularly, it hurts people who are trying to do things the right way and come here through the system. When you cut the line, you actually set those people back, and some of those people are in actual danger and trying to get asylum. Not cool. It also does hurt Americans to some extent. Not legal immigration. Legal immigration is always a net positive. But when you have millions of people coming here illegally that are in our emergency rooms, taking up space, causing prices to skyrocket, that impacts the American people. When you have people coming here illegally, getting counted in the census and watering down the impact of citizens' votes, that impacts Americans. When you have people coming here illegally and their kids are in the school system and suddenly your kid's getting held behind the classroom because the teacher has to try to talk to somebody in another language and keep them up to speed, that hurts Americans. Now, the better system here, both economically and just strategically, I think, for the Trump administration, would be to focus on getting the actual criminals, the people who have come here and committed actual crimes, and then giving amnesty or a pathway to at least residency for those who are trying to mostly do things the right way. If they're here, they're not breaking any laws, they're working, it actually would make a lot more sense to try to right this system versus deport all those people. But Democrats have overplayed their hand on this. What they did during the Biden administration, having that many people come here illegally, they just completely overplayed their hands. Like, the public sentiment is not with them or me even, which I think is more in the middle on this topic. And Trump won his election overwhelmingly. So he does have a mandate to deport people. I don't really have an issue with that on its face. But the problem the Trump administration has had is that once he got in office, they actually secured the border almost immediately. And so they didn't have a ton left to do on that front, at least not to get media headlines and look tough on this issue for their voters. And so I think they started this very aggressive deportation campaign where they are often skewing due process, and there have been some issues. I think some of this for them is strategic. They feel like if they create this gruesome picture in the media, it will put pressure on people to just up and leave, and then they can claim victory for that they deported far more people than they actually would be able to physically do. But it's gotten out of hand. As I said, I have no issue with deportations as long as there's due process. What I do have an issue with is deportations without due process, because that means you're probably going to deport people who have every right to be here, perhaps even citizens. And I especially have an issue with deporting people to a country that they're not from and putting them in a prison where they have absolutely no ability to get out. That is a very, very different equation than just deporting people. Now, support among independents especially has decreased for Trump on this. His approval has dropped from 50% on the issue of immigration to 38%. Additionally, many Latino voters, particularly those in the Venezuelan and Cuban communities who supported Trump in 2024, are expressing dissatisfaction. Now, some in the Trump camp have said that he's not really doing anything different than his predecessors. Both Clinton and Bush and even Obama deported millions and millions of people, which is somewhat accurate. And it's also accurate to say that Clinton expanded some rules that made it easier to deport people without due process, and that not all the people deported under these previous administrations had an actual hearing. But what's also true is that Trump has expanded things like the expedited removal process far beyond how Obama used it. He also has been pushing the family separation policy, and he has been trying to end asylum rights. So these things differ drastically from his predecessors, and this is where I think we're hitting some issues. That, and again, the prison in El Salvador. We have the right to deport people. We don't have the right to send them to a prison where they will be incarcerated with no hope of getting out in a country where they're not from. Now, obviously, the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia has gotten the most attention around this. This is one many of you have reached out to me and asked me to cover. I did talk about it in depth on the Tim Pool show a few weeks ago. I couldn't cover it here largely because I was traveling for that. So you can go back and watch that episode I was on. But I will say when it comes to this case, Democrats picked a bad hill to die on because this case in particular is wonky. It's got a lot of components that should raise the hair on your arms. You should be cautious. You should be concerned with some of the elements of what's going on here. But then there's enough like nuances. There's enough like little buts around the case that keep it from being the like ring the alarm catastrophe that many libertarians thought it was at first. So I'll just say this in summary around this case. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is from El Salvador. He was deported to El Salvador, where he is prosecuted by their government for his participation in a gang. And there is a good bit of evidence to suggest he does have some associations with the MS-13 gang. So that in and of itself makes his case kind of an outlier to me because he's being deported to the country where he's from, and then their government has the right to prosecute him and put him in jail. He's different in that way than many of the other people who have been sent to the El Salvador prison. The other thing that's really weird about his case is that it seems like there was some activist judicial ruling that basically prevented him from being deported, but then he never actually applied for asylum, which is super odd as well. So the like merits of whether or not he should have been allowed to be here, actually had the right to be here, that also seems very up in the air. And then lastly, it seems like he was given several chances to appear before a judge again and did not. So I say if you do that, you miss your chance at due process. The thing that made this case initially seem really, really bad to me, though, were reports that the Supreme Court had ruled Trump had to bring him back and that Trump was ignoring that ruling. That would be a constitutional crisis. That is not okay if that happens. But once I dug into that case, that's not really what happened. The Supreme Court actually ruled that he had to facilitate his return if it was something that was within the realm of possibility. And the ruling was written in a very wonky way where I don't think he actually or the administration was given a mandate to go and get this guy out of prison and bring him back. He just had to facilitate it if it was on the table. So I don't think this case quite rose to the level the left was pretending that it did. But if just a few things about that case were different, then this would have been a catastrophe. And what I will say is that during the course of this conversation, there have been many on the right, even some who are in elected offices, who have been calling for Trump and his administration to begin ignoring the courts altogether, to bypass their rulings if they don't agree with them. And I think that that is one of the dumbest, most short-sighted ideas I've ever heard in my life. And I said as much on Fox News last week.
58% saying those challenging the president and his policies are legitimately exercising their power. Hannah, final word on this.
Well, I think that our justice system certainly needs reform, and that's something I'd like to see come out of Congress. But as a whole, it does concern me that we see a growing number of people calling for the courts to be ignored or to be overrun. It's an important check and balance in our country, and I think this is something Republicans need to be very, very careful about right now. We've seen the left try to come in and suggest things like stacking the court and also ignoring things that judges say. That's a dangerous precedent that we don't want to enter. And I think that Republicans, especially those who are currently in office, calling for people to have that approach to the court system and to ignore those checks and balances are playing with very dangerous territory.
There is no point in saving America or saving Western values if we trash what makes us special, what makes us different, what actually separates Western values in the process. And due process is one of them. Checks and balances from the court is another. So while there have been some issues around deportation, and it does seem that they have deported at least one citizen who was a child in this whole mess, which is a very good indicator for why you need due process here, I actually think the bigger slippery slope within this conversation has to do with how Republicans are thinking about and approaching the courts under this administration, more so than him just deporting people. But regardless, this is another big fat L. What I think has been interesting over the past couple of weeks is seeing an increase in the number of people who say that they voted for Trump coming out and pushing back on some of the things I've discussed today and saying, I didn't vote for this. But the thing is, you did. Because Trump promised to do exactly what he's doing throughout his entire campaign. And I just personally find it inexcusable to not know that, to have voted for somebody and be completely unaware of the things they were threatening to do. If that was how much thought and intentionality you put into voting, you should have stayed home. And Trump even said as much when asked about that recently.
Concern out there. People are worried. Even some people who voted for you saying, I didn't sign up for this. So how do you answer those concerns?
Well, they did sign up for it, actually, and this is what I campaigned on.
He's absolutely right. So I'm personally not here for anybody who voted for Trump trying to come in and now pretend as if they had something like one pulled over their eyes or they got fooled. No, you didn't. I think most people knew what they were supporting and voting for him. They just don't want to be left holding the bag when the receipts come in. As a whole, I don't think the first 100 days have been a success. The polls indicate the vast majority of Americans don't either. I don't know how you guys feel. I'd be curious to hear in the comments. Are these the things that stood out to you the most? Were there other things that you thought were worse? Do you disagree with me on the things I've covered here? Are you like in favor of some of these actions? I'd love to hear from you. Take a second to weigh in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel while you're there. But I definitely want to know how you're feeling. Personally, I feel kind of stressed. I feel uneasy. I felt that way all along. I told my husband when we were talking about how we were going to vote and thinking about the election that I felt like the wheels might come off if he got reelected a second time, because many of the people and processes that were in place to like check him the first time around would not be. And so far, that certainly seems to be the case. So if you're like me and the Trump administration's antics have been giving you indigestion from stress, I have a product that could help. Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Good Brew. If you drink coffee, smoothies, or really anything in the morning, this is the easiest health upgrade you can make. Good Brew is a probiotic supplement that comes in a tiny, mess-free shot you can stir right into your drink. It's flavorless, it's shelf-stable, and it is super effective. It gives your gut that good bacteria without any pills or powders or extra sugar that I promise you, if you're anything like me and have my diet, you need. One reason I've really loved adding Good Brew into my diet is that most probiotics either taste gross to me or they need refrigeration so you can't travel with them. It really is hard to get in a good routine, but with Good Brew, you can just add it to whatever you're already drinking and then move on with your day. I've been mostly adding it to my morning coffees, and honestly, I feel better. I feel less bloated. I feel more regular. All in all, I have more energy. Cannot recommend it enough. So check it out at goodbrew.com. I will drop my affiliate link in the comments, and you can use the code Hannah for a nice little discount. Now, speaking of energy, enough doom and gloom, let's leave this episode on a highlight and talk about Trump's energy agenda. Personally, I think this is the best part of Trump's agenda. Nuclear energy development is an existential crisis for the US, and it's one that I've been paying a lot more attention to over the past year or so. I'm not a super scientific person. I'm not going to lie. A lot of it just goes right over my head. It used to sound really boring. I couldn't really understand it. I finally took the time to do my due diligence, and I'm telling you that nuclear energy has got to be a focal point for us. And like, we're going to pretend that this is an adult only conversation right now. Okay. We're at the adults table. If you disagree with this, you can go and sit at the kids table, but you simply cannot transition off of fossil fuels without nuclear energy, nor can we meet the growing energy demand that we are going to have with things like AI as they progress. And we also are not going to be able to keep up with our competitors like China without it. That's why I say that this is an existential threat. I am so fed up with the left pretending to care about climate change and pretending to have any notion of what you can do to solve it. Like, they do not have the answers. As I've said over and over and over again, their climate agenda, the green energy agenda, is almost entirely a Trojan horse for communist slop propaganda, idiotic policies that will do nothing but make everybody poor and have a worse quality of life, which we're already seeing with agencies like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, right, which oversees many of the states in the South. It has a monopoly on energy. We have to use it as consumers, and they do a terrible job. They're supposed to be focused on providing us energy and developing more nuclear. What have they been doing for the past 10 years? Mostly wasting their time and resources on things like wind and solar, which will never be capable of meeting even current demand, much less future demand. Now, thankfully, Trump has come in and cleaned house over there. He has fired several of their board members. We're getting ready to have new board appointees that will have to go through the Senate. I'm very hopeful that he's going to get that agency and similar ones to it in shape, but it has been absolutely out of control. And we've already seen things like rolling blackouts in Tennessee in very cold months, which ultimately gets people killed. It's inexcusable. That's why I said that you have to go sit at the kids' table if you fail to acknowledge these realities. You're going to hurt people. The entire war on U.S. energy and our independence has been so asinine. Like, I cannot fathom how low IQ you have to be to have been participating in the left's climate policy agenda over the past couple of years and attacking things like our oil and gas sector, which, by the way, is instrumentally cleaner than that of our competitors. So at the very least right now, while we are in a transition period away from fossil fuels, you should at least hope that it would be more of our oil and gas resources being exported because they are cleaner than other countries. And instead, the idiots here in America keep trying to shut these sectors down. If you want to transition off of fossil fuels, you need nuclear energy, and you actually need to empower our oil and gas sector to innovate and keep coming up with new technologies through things like fracking and those technologies they've already developed to hopefully be able to progress away from fossil fuels altogether. But that's not going to happen overnight, and it's childish to pretend like it can. Finally, with Trump on this front, it does feel like we have an adult in the room. On his first day back in office, President Trump declared a national energy emergency, which empowered the federal government to expedite the development of energy infrastructure for fossil fuels and nuclear and biofuels. Now, this move aimed to accelerate projects by reducing regulatory barriers, and the administration then issued executive orders directing federal agencies to review and identify regulations that impose undue burdens on domestic energy resource development, including oil, natural gas, coal, hydropower, biofuels, critical minerals, and nuclear energy. Efforts were also made to boost fossil fuel industries by removing regulations and opening federal lands to energy projects, signaling a commitment to increasing domestic energy production, and anybody telling you that any of that is a bad thing is an absolute hack. Additionally, the Department of Energy has supported the reopening of the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan, amazing, which marks the first restart of a retired commercial nuclear reactor in the US. Efforts have also been made to streamline the licensing process for new nuclear generation assets, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission working on developing a more efficient review and permitting process to facilitate nuclear energy projects. This is good stuff, guys. If you actually care about the climate, you have to be behind it. And honestly, it's getting drowned out. I don't think most people have any idea that he's doing any of this or that he's made these directives because all of the energy keeps getting, I guess pun not intended, keeps getting sucked out of the room and focused on other things. But if he would just hunker down and focus on his energy agenda, focus on deregulation, which was the best part of his first administration, focus on tax cuts, please focus on spending cuts. He's nowhere near focusing on that at all. He loves spending, but like that would be revolutionary. If they would focus on actually implementing the reforms that DOGE is suggesting, we could get on a good foot here. He's got some good ideas. As I said when he got elected, I was trying to maintain an optimistic viewpoint, and I said some of what he's going to do I'll like, some of what he's going to do I won't. Ultimately, the first 100 days has been a whole lot more bad Trump than good Trump. Hopefully, by the end of the next 100 days, I can reverse today's video and bring you 3 good things and only 1 bad. But so far, the administration is certainly off to a rocky start, and it remains to be seen just how long of a patience the American people are going to have for him. All right, guys, I hope you liked this episode. Make sure to actually like the video. Go subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And if you want even more content, you can head over to platforms like Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok.